When the Galactic archives revealed an extinct civilization's language that died 12,000 years ago, the greatest linguistic minds across 17 star systems declared it forever lost to time. No recordings, no living descendants, no hope. But when humanity's most insufferable archaeologist strolls into the translation chamber and starts speaking it fluently, claiming he picked it up firsthand, the galaxy faces an impossible truth. Either humans have mastered time travel, or this particular specimen is cosmically, devastatingly insane. What follows is a bureaucratic nightmare, an existential crisis, and the most aggravating revelation in galactic history. Listen, I've been a senior linguist for the collective archives for 93 cycles, and I thought I'd seen everything. Species that communicate through bioluminescent flatulence, check. A trade negotiation conducted entirely in interpretive dance, handled it. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the day a human walked into my translation lab and shattered every law of temporal causality I held dear. My name is Thudsilo, though most species just call me Thex because apparently 4 syllables is too much effort for creatures with vocal cords. I was working on Fragment 7 Alpha from the Vorathian dig site, a piece of stone tablet covered in symbols from a civilization that went extinct before my ancestors figured out fire. The Vorathians, bless their crystallized souls, vanished 12 millennia ago, taking their language, their culture, and apparently their recipe for really excellent fermented beverages with them. The fragment sat under my scanner, mocking me with its incomprehensible squiggles, when the lab door hissed open. Hey, is this the place where everyone's losing their minds over some old rocks? I didn't look up. Humans. They always announced themselves like they were doing you a favor by existing. The archives are closed to tourists, I said, adjusting my scanner's frequency. If you want the gift shop, it's 3 levels down and to the left. Gift shop. Buddy, I'm here about your dead language problem. That made me look up. The human was tall even by their species standards, wearing what appeared to be genuine leather, which was either very expensive or very illegal depending on which planet that leather came from. His hair was dark, pulled back in a style my database informed me was called a man bun, and his face carried that particularly human expression that suggested he knew something you didn't and found it hilarious. Dr. Marcus Hunt, he said, not waiting for an invitation before strolling over to my workstation. I heard through the grapevine, well, more like the interstellar academic gossip network, that you folks are stumped by Vorathian. I felt my secondary eyelids twitch, which is the Kelvorian equivalent of a stress headache starting. Vorathian is a dead language. No surviving speakers, no audio recordings, no linguistic descendants. It's a puzzle with missing pieces. Right, super dead. He leaned over my scanner, squinting at the fragment. Except, you know, I speak it. The silence that followed was profound. Somewhere in the archives, a cataloging drone beeped, a ventilation system hummed, and I stared at this human like he'd just claimed to be his own grandfather. You, what? I speak Vorathian. He said it like he was commenting on the weather. Casual, conversational, completely insane, fluently, actually, though I'll admit my accent's probably a bit archaic. Haven't practiced in a while. I've dealt with scam artists before. Every major archaeological find attracts them like moths to a plasma lamp. Usually they want money, sometimes they want fame, occasionally they just want attention. But something about the way this human stood there, hands in his pockets, grinning like he'd already won an argument I hadn't started yet, made my scales itch. Prove it. Gladly. He tapped the fragment, his finger leaving a smudge that made me die a little inside. Then he opened his mouth and spoke. The sounds that came out were wrong, not incorrect, wrong. They had harmonics that shouldn't exist in a human throat, rhythms that predated modern linguistic theory, and a confidence that made my translator implant scream in confusion before shutting itself off entirely. He spoke for exactly 17 seconds, then stopped and looked at me expectantly. Well, my blood had turned to ice water. Those weren't random sounds. My pattern recognition software, the same system that had spent 8 months failing to crack Vorathian grammar, suddenly lit up like a supernova. Matches. Dozens of the phonemes aligned with frequency patterns we'd theorized but never confirmed. The grammatical structure matched predictive models that 3 separate universities had independently developed. That's impossible. And yet, he spread his hands like a stage magician, revealing a trick. Here we are. How? I managed to croak out the word. Vorathian has been extinct for 12,000 years. There are no records, no teaching materials, no possible way you could have learned this unless I was there. He finished my sentence with the kind of smile that makes you want to punch someone and buy them a drink simultaneously, which I was. Nice folks, the Vorathians, bit obsessed with orbital mechanics, terrible sense of humor, made this fermented grain drink that could strip paint off a hull. They called it Jirel. I called it instant regret in a clay jug. My supervisor, Director Kalith, chose that exact moment to enter the lab. Perfect timing as always. She took one look at my expression, then at the human, then back at me. Vex, why do you look like you've seen a temporal anomaly? Because I think I have, I said quietly. Director, this human claims he can speak Vorathian, and unless my translator is catastrophically malfunctioning, he just did. Kalith went very still. When a Velkoran goes still, it means they're either thinking very hard, or about to remove your spinal column. Sometimes both. Repeat that. Hunt shrugged, and launched into another stream of Vorathian. This time he spoke for longer, and I could swear I heard him conjugating verbs. Complex ones. The kind we hadn't even confirmed existed until he made them exist through sheer audacity. When he finished, Kalith's skin had shifted to a pale silver, her species equivalent of shock. This isn't possible, she whispered. That's what I said. I threw my hands up. But here he is, speaking a language that has no surviving speakers, acting like it's no big deal. It really isn't. Hunt examined his fingernails. I mean, I also speak Keltharian Ancient Prexian, and a dialect of Tholian that won't be invented for another 300 years, but nobody ever gets excited about those. The lab fell silent again. This time it was the kind of silence that happens right before everything you understand about reality decides to take a vacation. Hold on, I said slowly. A language that won't be invented for 300 years? Yeah, that was a weird trip, he grinned. Time travels like that. You go backward, you go forward, you spend a weekend helping a dead civilization. Invent vowels. You come back, nothing makes sense anymore. It's great. Director Kalith and I exchanged a look. Then she did something I'd never seen her do in 4 decades of working together. She reached for the emergency contact panel on the wall, the one that connects directly to the Temporal Investigations Bureau. Hunt noticed, and his grin widened. Oh good, I was wondering when you'd call them. This is going to be fun. The Temporal Investigations Bureau doesn't show up in flashy ships with sirens blazing. No, they arrive in vessels so aggressively mundane that your brain tries to forget them while you're still looking at them. The agent who stepped into my lab 3 hours later was named Verix Quinn, and she had the expression of someone who'd spent her entire career explaining why time travel wasn't real to people who'd absolutely experienced time travel. So, she said, not even bothering with introductions, which one of you broke causality this time? Hunt raised his hand like a student volunteering for extra credit. That'd be me, Dr. Marcus Hunt, temporal anthropologist, historian, and generally problematic human. Quinn pulled out a scanner that looked like it cost more than my entire lab and waved it at Hunt. The device immediately started beeping in a pattern I can only describe as digitally screaming. Temporal signature confirmed. Chronological displacement markers across multiple periods. Paradox residue. She looked up from the scanner. You got temporal contamination dating back 14,000 years. How are you still alive? Clean living and spite. Mostly. Hunt sat on my workstation, which was completely inappropriate, and also somehow made the whole situation worse. Also, I'm really good at not creating paradoxes. Well, big ones. Small ones are fine. They sort themselves out. I felt my brain trying to escape through my ears. You're saying time travel is real? Actually real? Oh yeah. Hunt pulled what looked like a data chip from his pocket. Want to see my dissertation? Participatory archaeology, A practical guide to not destroying reality while stealing historical artifacts. Got my doctorate from a university that won't exist for 6 centuries. The defense committee was very confused about the date on my paperwork. Quinn rubbed her temples in a gesture that transcended species. I suddenly felt a kinship with this agent. We were both dealing with the same cosmic headache. Let me guess, Quinn said. You went back to study the Vorathians, spent several years living among them, learned the language, possibly influenced their development in minor ways that definitely violated 37 temporal protocols, and now you're back here acting surprised that everyone's confused. Well, when you say it like that, it sounds irresponsible. Hunt looked genuinely offended. I'll have you know I was very careful. Only changed 3 major historical events. Maybe 4, 5, tops. And they were all improvements. Director Caliph made a sound like a dying turbine. He changed historical events. Minor ones, Hunt protested. I taught them crop rotation, which they would have figured out anyway. Introduced the concept of soap, which honestly should count as a humanitarian mission. And I may have accidentally prevented a small war, but that one really wasn't my fault. How was I supposed to know that suggesting they talk about their feelings would revolutionize their entire diplomatic system? Quinn closed her eyes for a long moment. You introduced therapy to the Vorathians? I introduced conversation. They turned it into therapy. Very emotionally intelligent species, actually. Shame about the asteroid. That made me sit up. The asteroid that destroyed their civilization? The cosmic disaster that ended their entire culture? Yeah, that was rough. For the first time, Hunt's expression turned serious. I tried to warn them, showed them the calculations, explained the orbital mechanics, even built a scale model. They believed me too. Problem was their technology wasn't advanced enough to do anything about it. They had 70 years warning and no way to stop it. He paused. I stayed until the end. Helped them build the archives, preserve what they could. Figured if I couldn't save them, I could at least make sure they were remembered properly. The lab went quiet. Not the shocked silence from before, but something heavier, something that tasted like grief. That's why you're here, I said quietly. You didn't come to show off. You came to make sure we're translating it correctly. Hunt nodded. The Vorathians spent their last 70 years writing down everything they knew, everything they'd learned, everything they wanted the universe to remember about them. And you folks are treating it like a puzzle. It's not a puzzle, it's a letter, a goodbye letter to a future they'd never see, from people who knew they were the last ones who'd ever speak these words. He pulled out another data chip, this one looking older, worn. This is everything. Complete Vorathian dictionary, grammar rules, cultural context, history, poetry, jokes that'll make sense once you understand their humor. Even the recipe for Jarrail, though I'm warning you, that stuff is dangerous. Quinn's scanner beeped again, more insistently this time. That data chip is 14,000 years old. Yet, one of the last things they gave me before the impact made me promise I'd find someone who'd care enough to get it right. He looked at me. You care enough? I took the chip with trembling hands. The weight of it felt impossible. Not the physical weight, the other kind. The kind that comes from holding the last words of an entire civilization. Yeah, I managed. I care enough. Good. Hunt stood up, brushing dust off his pants. Then my work here is done. I've got a date in ancient Cimmeria next week and I'm already late. Time travel's weird like that. Wait, I called out as he headed for the door. You can't just drop a bombshell like this and leave. We have questions. The academic community will want to verify your claims, study your methods, understand how I time travel. He grinned over his shoulder. Sorry, can't tell you that. Temporal Prime Directive. Also, I don't actually know how the device works. Found it in a market on station Kepler 42b. Bought it from a vendor who may or may not have been a future version of myself, and figured I'd sort out the details later. Still working on that part. Quinn stepped between him and the door. I can't let you leave. You're a walking temporal violation. I should arrest you, confiscate your device and lock you in a cell until reality finishes processing your paperwork. Hunt's grin widened. You could do that, and hear me out here. You could let me go and avoid the mountain of paperwork that comes with prosecuting someone whose crimes technically haven't happened yet because they occurred in the past, which is also the present, depending on your frame of reference. Plus, I know where 6 other extinct civilizations hid their archives, and I'd be happy to share that information with anthropologists who aren't trying to arrest me. Quinn and Hunt stared at each other for a long moment. Then Quinn stepped aside. "I'm not seeing you," she said flatly. "This conversation never happened. You were never here. If anyone asks, I investigated a false alarm and found nothing." "You're my favorite law enforcement officer." Hunt gave her a small salute. "Diggs Director Kaelith, it's been weird. Take care of those Vorathians for me. They deserved better than extinction." And then he was gone, leaving behind nothing but impossible evidence and the lingering smell of temporal paradox, which apparently smells like ozone and old books. I looked down at the data chip in my hands, then up at Director Kaelith. "So," I said, "I'm going to need a bigger lab." She started laughing. Not polite academic laughter, but the kind that comes from having your understanding of reality completely demolished and rebuilt in the span of a few hours. "You know what the worst part is," she said between laughs. "He's probably going to do this to some other poor linguist. Somewhere else in the galaxy, another researcher is going to meet him, and he's going to say something like, 'Hold my beer, I was there,' and ruin their entire worldview." Quinn picked up her scanner and headed for the door. "For what it's worth, he's done this 17 times that we know of, always picks the most impossible languages, always has perfect evidence, always leaves before we can properly process what just happened." "Is he dangerous?" I asked. Quinn paused at the doorway. "Dangerous? No. Annoying? Absolutely. But every language he's helped translate, every civilization he's documented, they all get remembered properly. Nobody else is doing that. Nobody else can." After she left, I sat at my workstation and loaded the data chip. The Vorathian language bloomed across my screen, complete, whole, alive in a way I'd never imagined possible. And at the bottom of the file a note in English, "Remember them well. They were good people, and their beer really was terrible. Best Marcus." I laughed then because what else could I do? The universe was bigger, stranger, and more ridiculous than I'd ever imagined. And somewhere out there, a human with a time machine was probably explaining agriculture to ancient aliens, and wondering why everyone seemed so surprised. Hold his beer indeed.